All right, I'm here with JP Bierly from Bierly Brewing, and
Hey, how you doing?
this is part of our Meet the Brewers series with the Zero Tolerance Facebook group. And so, JP, I just want to ask you first, how is the pandemic treating your hair, right? My hair is getting really long and college-like. How do you keep your hair so trim in the pandemic?
I have a couple secrets. One of them is about 5 weeks ago. I grabbed my pair of scissors and I went to my wife Amelia and I said, "Could you please cut my hair?" And she did it in my kitchen. I was so scared. I was so frightened. I won't let anybody touch my hair. And she cut my hair. She did a great job. And I was a little self-conscious for a couple days when I went out because I was kind of thinking, everybody's going to see my hair and going to think, "Ooh, who cut his hair? He must have broken quarantine." But I got out of that. It grew in just a little bit more, and I felt comfortable again. So yeah, I'm just about getting to needing the point where I need another haircut. Actually, it's just
Yeah, I'm myself included. I think it's almost time for Corona cut number two, right? So,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that's frightening. Did you
Yeah.
see the meme on Facebook what, week two of the lockdown with the person with the mullet, and it said, us after 10 weeks of quarantine, and homegrown haircuts. Uh,
Yeah. So I wanted to get your perspective on, well, what got you interested in brewing to begin with, and did you start brewing gluten free to begin with? And if you didn't, like, well, how did your journey take you to what you're doing now for gluten free brewing?
yeah, so back in 2006, I started homebrewing with barley, mostly extract, and I was not diagnosed at the time. And how I got into homebrewing was my father-in-law. Well, I should back up. He wasn't my father-in-law yet. He was my girlfriend's father, my wife now. And I went over one day and was having dinner over at her parents' house, and Mike is his name. Mike said, "Have you ever brewed before? I haven't done it in a long time, but I'd really like to get back into it." And I thought about it for just a split second and thought, this could be a really great way to get to know this person that I'm going to hope that I know for a real long time. And so I said, I never have, but I'd love to try it. So we started home brewing. And at the time, neither of us were diagnosed celiac. We actually both are now, interestingly, but both his daughter, now my wife, and his wife, my mother-in-law, have been diagnosed. Amelia, my wife, for her entire life, and Cheryl, her mother, since like 1981. So what we were doing with home brewing starting in 2006 is we would brew our batch of really bad barley beer because it was terrible. And then we were experimenting with gluten-free ingredients for dedicated gluten-free for a dedicated gluten-free batch of beer with no barley included. And we were using all of the fermentables we had available to us at the time that we could figure out. We were using, can you guess what we were using?
Sorghum. Was it
Nope.
sorghum? No, brown
Nope.
rice syrup.
Nope. Not available. Not available. Any other guesses?
I can't think of anything else. Candy syrup.
There was the candy sugar, the predecessor to candy syrup,
Yep.
but the candy syrup wasn't out yet. So if you've ever used candy sugar, which I use it in a batch still, even the dark color candy sugar never gives you a dark colored beer. It's really strange. I've never figured that one out. So we were using candy sugar. We were using honey in very small amounts. We were using molasses, which don't use molasses in your beer unless you like licking iron. And then the big fermentable was we were using rice syrup solids. And that led to a very, very light beer. but it was actually good. And I actually brewed kind of my interpretation of that beer back this last fall. And I called it Back in My Day IPA. And it was really good. Like, I remembered the beer tasting really good back then, but I was pretty sure that it was pretty bad. It just was, memory giving me those rose-colored glasses. But that beer that I brewed just a couple months ago with the same way, it was really good.
It sounds like if you take the hops out, you're brewing a mead, right?
A little bit, yeah. It was like what did the one person say? The gluten-free home brewer that was brewing 100% adjunct beer.
Right. So, can you give us a rundown of, well, first of all, your last name is Bierly. Is that a
Yeah.
coincidence that you became a home brewer and then now have your own brewery, or was that like a fate that you were to become a brewer, right? What
Well,
do you
yeah.
think?
I mean, the interesting story about it is my great grandparents that I knew they were teetotalers. They were prohibitionists
Oh, wow. Yeah.
back during the time of prohibition, and they're buried up near Portland, and I drive by every once in a while, make sure they're not turning in their grave. Um, because
You
they
got to be a pretty tough teetotaler to have a last name like Beerly, though, right? Come
right.
on.
Well, I knew when I decided I wanted to start a brewery, I thought about the name of the brewery for about 2 seconds because
Yeah.
I already knew what the brewery was going to be called.
So, can you give us the whole rundown, the who, what, when, where, why about your brewery, your operation? Where is it at? How big of batches do you have? It looks like, from what I've seen before, that you have a tight quarters to get things done. Give us a little overview about the brewery itself.
So the current facility is 800 square feet. I have a freight container in the back so I can store large purchases of things like bottles and malt and things like that, which really makes the rest of the space work. The brewery's in McMinnville. McMinnville is the original dedicated gluten-free brewery tasting room capital of the world. I say that in front of the mirror every morning 5 times.
I thought McMinnville was a wine town. Come on, JP.
We are a brewing town because it takes a lot of beer to make good wine. Um, so we're currently in 800 square feet. I have a 2-barrel brew house. I've got 3 fermenters that are 2-barrel. I'm adding a 4th one this next week. I'm going to get a 3.5-barrel. So I'll double, actually a 3.5-barrel unitank. So I'll double batch into that in one brew day so that I can make enough beer. And I've got a 90-gallon brew kettle. It's all electric. I've got a 100-gallon mash tun and hot liquor tank. They stack together, one on top of each other. And we make it work. We also have a 300 square foot tasting room up front. So you have to subtract that out of the 800 square feet, and that tells you how big my brew area is. And that's what we're doing right now. You may have seen on social media, we just announced a few weeks ago that we are going to move. We're going to move into a 4,000 square foot building that we do need to renovate to be a brewery on 3rd Street in McMinnville. That's our main street here in McMinnville. And we're hoping to move in there by the winter. We'll use the current 2-barrel system for the first year or so and then upgrade to a little bit bigger brewery. I won't say exactly how much. And just jam on that. And my 2-barrel system will be my pub system. It's really easy to work with. It's really hands-on. I like that. I like really hands-on brewing. I like to be able to let the brewing process become more of an instinct rather than buttons that I push on a screen that do the work for me. And then that, I really feel like that gives the beer the taste like it's a Bierly versus being anybody else's beer. because it's my choices, my decisions in the process that are consistent.
So, I mean, once you get all that space, I mean, it sounds like you have about 500 square feet of actual brewing space now. So if you get this brand new, big, huge space, what are you gonna do with all that space? I mean, are you just gonna like hold your arms out and walk around in a circle? You probably can't even do this right now, right?
Yeah,
Without bumping into anything.
yeah, yeah. So the short answer is I'm gonna dance. I'm gonna do a
Yeah.
lot of dancing, and I'm gonna maybe ride my bike around inside, which is fitting because the building for 50 years was a bicycle repair shop.
Nice, nice.
Is the building we're going into, and but I do know too that I'm going to fill up that space pretty quick. When we moved into this 800 square feet, when I first leased it, I said, "Oh my gosh, this is so much room."
So the real question though is, does more space equal more donuts, JP?
Yes.
Yes. Is that going to be included in the new brewery? The reason why I say it is I'm looking at your website, beerlybrewing.com, and the very first thing that comes up, I don't know if this is strategic or not, is a giant maple bar, right? So come
Yeah.
on. And
It is. It's Maple Bar weekend this week.
I'm a little bit hungry, and I'm just getting very hungry looking at that picture. It looks really delicious.
It's funny because my wife Amelia is our baker and marketing person, and she and I laugh a lot that we're a brewery, but we primarily talk about the baked goods that we make. In fact, we were meeting with somebody the other day who had looked at our website and said, "So, did you start out as a bakery and then you added beer?"
I see some of the social media on Facebook and Instagram that gets posted with all the food, and man, it looks really delicious. I'm definitely gonna have to make a trip down there just to try some of the good food that looks like you guys are pushing out of that. And that's all your wife, right? She does all
Yeah.
that stuff. Nice.
Yep, she
Looks
does the
delicious.
pretzels, she does the baguettes, she does the donuts, and yeah, that's really she's really the ace in the hand, because I happen to think we make pretty good beer, but her donuts are excellent and her pretzels are excellent, and uh, I think her pretzels and donuts are probably better than my beer is. So, um,
Wow. Wow.
they're really good.
We're gonna have
They're
to
really
we might have to edit that part out,
good. You think so?
So talk to me about the pandemic. We all know that's going on. So you have this new space that's opening up. I've talked to several other people that have plans or right in the middle of opening and pushed everything back. Is this current situation that we're in, is it pushing back your plans significantly? Are you still moving forward and all full speed ahead on your new setup? And what do you see as like in the near future, your plans with the pandemic in mind?
Yeah. So, in terms of like what has changed for us, uh, I mean everything, nothing. What would 2020 have been without the pandemic? I don't know. We had some with the new facility. We had some plans on how we were going to get in there. Those plans changed. We had to take a beat and think about whether or not we still wanted to go forward, because 800 square feet with a lease that we can afford easily is a pretty attractive place to ride out the end of the world. You know,
Yep,
um,
yep,
but pretty early on, we were looking at the numbers and saying, like, we're still growing, and so we want to be still moving forward, even during this time, and we were pretty lucky in terms of being essential in the state of Oregon. We were pretty lucky because we already had a good wholesale business. All of our on-premise wholesale went away immediately, It's slowly coming back now, but all those kegs and all those bottles for restaurants, those restaurants were just closed. But that wasn't the majority of our wholesale business. That's always been grocery stores and bottle shops, and those places stayed open. And so we've seen more sales. And that's kind of the fact that we've concentrated more on grocery stores as opposed to tap rooms and bottle shops and restaurants was has been, over the 4 years that we've been in business, an intentional choice. My feeling, has always been, as somebody who has celiac myself, my thought has always been that I want to have my beer where people with celiac disease expect to be able to find it. And other people might have a slightly different experience than I do, but I know when I was diagnosed, there were all these places I didn't go anymore, all these restaurants that I didn't go to anymore. And my ability to walk into a restaurant that I'd never been to before and expect that they were going to even have food that I could eat, let alone something to drink, made me not so adventurous.
Right.
But the place that I really started relying on for things to eat and things to drink were grocery stores. Those became the new restaurant, because you could think I'd really like fried chicken. Well, we can make fried chicken with gluten-free ingredients by going to the grocery store and getting all the ingredients for it. And what else do they have at the grocery store? Gluten-free beer. So you can also get that, take it home, and you have a nice meal of exactly what you want. And it was one stop, and then you prep it at home. So my focus has always been to get into grocery stores that get it, that understand what gluten-free food is, and that it's not a fad diet, that it's a choice for a person's health, and then go. That's kind of been the philosophy. So it kind of ended up a happy accident where we're at right now at this exact time, that we were able to continue with that part of our business without any interruption, despite a pandemic.
Well, what else are people going to do when they're stuck at home but drink a lot of beer, right? So it makes
That's true.
perfect sense, right? And I'm sure that the grocery stores, the beer is flying off the shelves, right?
It is.
So
Yeah, it is. Yeah, one of the things that when I was doing my research for opening a brewery was to look at what happened to breweries during the Great Recession. And the anecdote at that time, just even 5 or 6 years ago, was that breweries during the Great Recession did well. They were quote recession proof. And so that was one piece that I took in and wrote into the business plan, was that if we go in to this and get into the right places, of course nobody was expecting a pandemic that was going to shut down every bar and restaurant, but if we go in to this the right way and grow in a sustainable way, the idea was that beer is still an affordable luxury, even amidst financial crisis, which is what we were looking at from 2008 through 2020.
JP, how dare you say that it's a luxury? It's a necessity. Come on.
Oh yes, beer is proof that God loves us and wants us to be happy, right?
So let's talk about equipment. I
Yeah,
I
yeah.
I wanted to get your take on equipment for brewing great gluten-free beer, and what is the one thing, maybe you have more than one thing, that you find is essential? I know that, for instance, you have a custom mill that is actually now something that Gluten-Free Home Brewing sells as a dedicated gluten-free mill, but maybe there's something else that's in your arsenal that you think you could not live without, right?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this because, we talked a couple days ago and you asked me to think about my one piece of equipment, and I couldn't come up with one. So for your consideration, I have three pieces of equipment that I can't live without. And I am going to show them to you in terms of importance to a home brewer and really accessibility. So why do I feel like Johnny Carson right now? So the first is the Marx Keg Cleaner. You can get this online through kegwasher.com, I believe it is. They also sell it at many local homebrew stores. This is essential for cleaning kegs, corny kegs. If you take the spear out of a Sankey keg, you can clean it on this too. You can clean fermenter buckets. Anything, this is the same size as one of the 8-gallon Brewcraft fermenters, the plastic fermenters. You can clean 5-gallon buckets. You can take this spear off. It has a connection like this to plug into your post to clean the gas side. I always plug in a liquid side, beer side, black beer, and then gray gas to let it drip out of that. The really big advantage of this is that this reservoir right here, which is where the cleaning solution goes, this is 1 gallon, and you can use it until it's dirty. So I usually clean, because I'll rinse out my kegs before I put them on the marks, and I usually use this for 4 or 5 kegs, as long as it's looking clean still and it's not dirty. I do a 30-minute cycle with PBW. I make the PBW about 120 degrees, and then I do a 20-minute cycle with SanaClean. For something like this, you want to use a low foaming acid rinse rather than the Star San. The Star San, you're going to have foam everywhere. So look at SanaClean and use SanaClean in this. And this is the Marx Keg Cleaner. They're under $100 from your local homebrew store.
I think my kids would prefer it if you use Star San in that thing. That would be awesome to them.
Star San and a little bit of food coloring, and you have a party.
Yeah.
The next one, to stay on brand, some of you have seen this before. Why am I talking to you like you're an audience? You may have seen this before, Kale. This is a standard false bottom. This fits in the 8-gallon heavy-duty brewing kettle that many local homebrew stores have. I believe it's an Eagle brand false bottom. This is the right size for barley, but as we all know, gluten-free malts will pass right through this mesh. So this is combined with a 500 micron filter screen, and then I've adapted that with a ring that goes all the way around the perimeter to sandwich the whole thing together. The ring is not necessary for the first 2 years I used this. I used cotter pins, 4 of them, to clip it at 4 corners, and it worked just fine. I have 2 more of these, including one for a 20-gallon mash tun and one for my 2-barrel mash tun that are constructed exactly the same way. And after I had those done, I liked the ring design so much better that I went back and had a ring made for this one. And just a single handle, because you just want to be able to lift it up out as you're cleaning. You don't need 2 handles. More handles is just more to hit with your mash paddle. That's my philosophy. And
So that's version 2.0 on that one.
this is version 1 with revision 2.0.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, because I've got version 1, version 2, and version 3, and then technically now this is version 1, revision 2, I guess.
And it reminds me of the filters, the screens that Gluten-Free Homebrewing is adding in with their grandfather, right?
Yeah, his are 1,000 microns. A little bit bigger. It still filters all the same. And Brian and Alyssa came up with that filter design based on this first one that I made, and he loves it. It's great. It's a great solution for mashing with gluten-free malts. It really is.
All right, so
I have a
It
third.
seems like you might have one other thing. You're kind of breaking the rules here, but okay, let's see what else you got.
I asked Jason Yerger of Mutantis what he said his one piece of equipment was. Do you know what he told me, Kale? He
What?
said, I don't think I was asked that question. So
Well, we like to change it up here. We like to change things up.
I figured you asked me because I'm out there as the equipment guy, right? Uh, so the third piece, and this is, what's the right way to say this? This is really cool. It's a really cool toy. It's absolutely essential for me, but maybe not so essential for a home brewer. But on the other hand, if you have around $400 to spend, then maybe it is. Maybe it's a Christmas present or Father's Day. Father's Day is coming up. And that's my Anton Par density meter. It's called the Easy Dens from Anton Par. There's a good picture of it right there. It contains their proprietary YouTube technology, patent pending. There is a glass tube in here that you take a sample of your wort, you stick it on here, you push down the plunger, it fills the YouTube up, and the extra comes out of this dealy. I always do it right next to the sink. It connects up to your iPhone or Android as well. I don't think if you have a Windows phone, it'll work with that. But we should talk later if you still have a Windows phone. And
Does it work with my
it,
Zune? My Zune?
gosh, check with Bill Gates on that one. Check with Bill Gates. I'm gonna say check with Bill Gates. So the cool thing about this is that one, it can use as little as a 3 milliliter sample. So I've measured my sample jar for the triple scale hydrometer that I always used to use, and that thing was like 8, 9, 10 ounces, something like that. That's like almost a beer. And if you do a 5-gallon batch, there's only 40 pints in a 5-gallon batch, so that's like half a pint just to measure the gravity. And if you want to take another reading, so this 3 milliliters, you can also measure any time you want during fermentation, even once there's alcohol, even after the beer is finished. As soon as it has CO2 in it, as soon as it's carbonated, you have to degas it first. You have to get all the CO2 out of solution. But even then, you can totally measure your density, which is specific gravity, at any point during the brew process, during the mash, during the lauter, anytime you want. One of the things I love to do with this is I actually will, as I'm lautering out of the mash lauter tun, I will take samples about every, for me, a lauter takes about 45 minutes. So about every 10 minutes, I'll take a quick sample, throw it through the Anton Par here, and just see how much sugar is still in what's coming out. And that actually created a bunch of extra beer for me, because I discovered that even though I was getting 100% efficiency with my mash using Ondia Pro, I still had sugar that was coming out of the wort. And so what I've started doing is actually collecting. So I get all my runnings, and then I measure the final runnings, see where I'm at. And if I have any sugar in there, I actually refill the mash tun, recirculate Forloff for 5-10 minutes until it's clear again, and then run it again. And that gives me even more sugar. I boil that up, sometimes add, I don't know, honey, beet sugar, a little bit of sorghum, a little bit of brown rice. You could do a second fortifying mash if you want, and just using some pale and get some more gravity. And I make a second beer with runnings from the first mash. So I did that yesterday. Again, checked it as it was lautering, and my mash efficiency yesterday that I calculated on one batch, I made a half barrel batch of IPA, was 121%.
That's impressive. That is very impressive. And it brings me to another topic of conversation that I wanted to touch on. And I have to say, from the articles that are on gluten-free home brewing and the work that you've done with Jason Yerger at Mutantis, you and Jason and several others have been pretty instrumental in terms of some research in terms of Ondia Pro, some of the enzymes that we use for gluten-free brewing and the home brewer scale, and also I'm sure that you use those in your current brewery.
Yep.
Talk to me about your thoughts on high efficiency brewing with enzymes and your kind of philosophy in terms of enzyme use. Are you a single infusion guy? Are you like a multi-step, rising, falling, all kinds of craziness? What's your thoughts on that?
So I'm not a single infusion guy. I used to be, but the reality is single infusion is really easy. But the reality is that Ondia denatures in the single infusion range. You want to be up like 165, 168 minimum for Termamil to really be happy and doing its thing. So that's there. So there's a gap because Ondia doesn't want to be over 145. You can push Ondia up to about 150-ish. It starts to denature around there. I run Ondia at 141. 141 to 143 is where I run my Ondia. And I get, 100% efficiency, 105% efficiency, 120% efficiency yesterday. And that's where it needs to be. So definitely multi-step. I do a 2-step rising mash. So I start, I actually usually pre-cook the rice. Some of my recipes I don't. Some of my older recipes I don't because I find it changes the beer from what the recipe used to be a little bit too much. So like my Baker Street Porter, which is also Roca Creek Porter on gluten-free home brewing. That's a beer that I don't pre-cook the rice on. Pre-gelatinize the rice essentially, and I just let the Ondia and I let the Termamil do the work for me. So pre-cook the rice or not, I mash in at 142. There's lots and lots of calculators out there that can help you hit that mash temperature exactly. I'm fortunate that I don't have to hit it if I don't want to because I've got a Herms coil in my hot liquor tank. So if I mess it up, I can run it through the Herms coil until I hit my temperature. I can also run it through basically a cold Herms coil to lower the temperature if I need to. So mash in 142. I let it, I adjust I have to always get it right. I have to adjust the pH first, which I'm currently looking for between 4.5 and 4.8 for pH. And then I add my all of my water salts to the mash and finally pitch the Ondia in. Let it sit there. Go ahead and give it a good mix. Let it sit there for an hour. And then I start to recirculate through my Herms coil in my hot liquor tank to bring the temperature of the mash up to 175. Let it sit there for an hour. And then I go straight to the Forloff. I don't do a mash out step, where you put extra hot liquor on top to arrest the enzyme, because if you're using Termamil is active until just right before boiling. So a mash out step is not effective. And in fact, just contributes to compaction of the mash bed because you're putting all that extra weight on top and you compact the mash. So skip mash out, just go straight to the Forloff until it runs clear, and then start the fly sparge or batch sparge, whatever you're most comfortable with, and lauter to your boil kettle. That's how I mash. I have helped another commercial brewery I've helped a couple other commercial breweries really dial in a falling mash regime that works for them, also gives them a similar 95% mash efficiency rating. And I should mention too, 95% mash efficiency, that is using higher numbers to begin with. So it's actually quite a bit higher than the old numbers. We used to always use 1.020 as the PPG for rice malt, right?
Yeah,
I use
what are you using now for your number for rice malts?
26 to 28, depending on what it is, and getting 95% efficiency out of that.
Wow. So it
So
might even be higher than that then.
yeah, so yeah, at 28. A barley brewer relies on somewhere in the 70% efficiency range, and barley's 30. Somebody can correct me, I'm sure, but barley's perceived to be more fermentable than than gluten-free malts are. I'm getting 100% efficiency, which is theoretically impossible, but maybe not with those higher numbers. So yeah.
You're just that good of a brewer, right? You're like 100% kind of guy. You get every single last little bit of sugar out of there, right?
Straight A's. No, I'm very lucky to have started a collaboration with Jason Yerger. He was really on the cutting edge of doing some research for mash, enzymes for mash. Alan Windhausen at Holidaily Brewing as well. He has a lot of information about enzymes and specifically what they do, including knowing what all the different prefixes and suffixes of the different enzymes actually do to the grain itself. It's really cool. Those two know so much more than I do.
Yeah, we've had several we've had at least one zero tolerance meeting where we really dived into the enzymes, and you could probably talk about it every meeting for the next year, right?
Yeah.
And part of it, it seems like you have to have like a degree in chemistry or something like that to really get it, right? So
Yeah.
I have to keep re-looking at the same articles over and over again because I'm like, what is that?
Yep.
Which different things get created for which different sugars? Is this maltose?
Yep.
Glucose? it's
Yep.
it's pretty crazy, right? So
Yeah, absolutely. 6 months ago, I was working on research for this, and I actually looked up the sugar content, the traditional sugar content of a barley mash, and I actually think I could probably pull it up here. Sugar content, uh, or maybe sugar mash. This is, I'm sure, a very boring part of this. Um, nope, that doesn't tell me. But it's let's see, mash. Oh man, Ed Golden, what a great guy. Um, yeah, I'm not finding it in my notes right now, but it's you want so much sucrose, you want so much maltose, you want so much maltotriose, and then the rest you want higher saccharides, and those higher saccharides give you that body and that head retention. So one of the things with enzymes that we tend to do with gluten-free brewing in the name of efficiency is we turn everything into sucrose with a glucoamylase. Sorry, we turn everything into glucose with a glucoamylase. Glucose is very fermentable, extremely fermentable, but it it makes the beer really really dry.
right.
And what we really want, what the main part of barley mashes is the maltose and the maltotriose. And so if we can get more of that maltose and that maltotriose, especially the maltose, into our mash, into our wort, then the yeast is going to be happier and it's going to produce a beer that tastes like beer rather than tasting like cider or wine or something else that's not beer.
Or a brute IPA, right? Which was the big thing, right? So
Sure. I mean,
we've
I
been
make a brewed IPA and people love it. And
we've
and
been yeah,
I make my brewed IPA without any enzymes at all. I just use
yeah,
straight like gluten-free ingredients that love to go dry and
right,
just let it
right,
go.
right. Yep. So what do you think in terms of if you had to recommend a recipe to someone that's just starting out as a novice brewer? what would be like the one recipe that is something that, there's low failure on that you think would be the, the best kind of recipe to start with in terms of gluten-free brewing?
So for gluten-free brewing, I think that the best way to go is to use a recipe that uses a technique like partial mash or partial grain. So use some ingredients that are going to give you some flavor that's got more than just extract sorghum or brown rice syrup or honey or something. I mean, a majority honey something is mead, but use some malt that gives you some flavors that you can't get with sorghum. But also use sorghum, because if you use it the right way, it's got a very neutral flavor. One thing to really watch out as a novice or beginning brewer is be very careful how you add the sorghum to the boil kettle, because if you add it too fast and it goes to the bottom and caramelizes, that's where you get those off flavors, that mineral taste or the twang that people talk about. That's caramelization of that sorghum, of those sugars on the bottom of the kettle. So I would really recommend a recipe like Roca Creek Porter, which is partial grain, that uses you mash the specialty malts, 2 types of millet, 3 types of rice, and then you add the sorghum in the boil kettle, and you get a really nice beer. That's actually the civilian version of my Baker Street Porter, if anybody's had that beer. I think you have.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
that's Baker Creek Porter and Roca Creek Porter were originally the same recipe. There, not anymore. But that's where that recipe came from. And the cool thing about doing a beer like that is going back to the idea of mash efficiency. If you use no enzymes at all, if you totally mess up the mash, no matter what you do, you're going to get 25% efficiency. Even if you use unmalted grain, you're going to get 25% efficiency. So that's going to make a contribution to the beer, no matter what you do. If you can get a little better than that out of the grain, then you're going to have a higher gravity beer. You're going to have more flavor in the beer from that grain, from that millet and that rice. But if you totally mess it up, you're still going to have a good beer. And that sorghum backstops any flaws with your mashing technique, and makes it so that you can make a really nice beer with a minimum of equipment. You could do that as you could make that recipe as an all-in-one system, or with a mash bag and give it a good squeeze, and then add the sorghum and boil it. It's just a really easy recipe to use.
You could even do it without even milling the grains, right? You could just steep it like the John Palmer, steeping with specialty grains, and get a really low gravity beer, but it would be more flavorful than if it was just an all sorghum beer, right? So you get that
Absolutely.
flavor profile from those other grains.
I'd recommend, if you don't have a mill, you can always use a Corona style mill. That's like the 2 stones against each other. It'll create a lot of flour, but that's going to give you more than just using the whole grains and steeping them. You're going to miss a lot if you don't do some kind of crush, just because the surface area is so much less with the unmilled grain. It's not going to give as much. But if that's the tech you have, use what you got. And the old saying from Papazian is, "Relax, don't worry, have a homebrew," right?
And my saying is, run with what you brung, man, right?
Yeah, that's
So
right.
do whatever you got to do to make some beer, right? So
Brew hoppy. Is this the
So
part of the interview where we just say idioms from homebrewing?
exactly, right? So last question for you
Yeah.
here. So we've talked about your brewery, we talked about some techniques, we've talked about the pandemic. Give us an overall vision that you have for Bierly Brewing, for your brewing over the next, say 5-10 years. Where do you see yourself as a brewer and Bierly Brewing in the future?
Yeah. So I dream every night about where we're going to be in 5 to 10 years, um, and and I have an idea of where I want to be, and it'll be interesting to see how much further than that we get. I always end up being pulled by the market um, faster than I had expected to be in a place. So 5 years where I hope to be is brewing on a larger system in my new space, cranking out somewhere around 2,000 to 2,500 barrels a year. Few employees, open 5 days a week, in most of the states in the Pacific Northwest, in cans, in that time too, and that's kind of comfortable for 5, 10, a little bit more than that. Um, Maybe looking at a larger dedicated manufacturing facility in addition to our headquarters with where the brew pub is, and watching my boys grow up. Right now I've got a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. Watching them grow up, naming beers after him still. Felix is the name of my 4-year-old. Working on getting the beer for Jamie put out. That's James Blonde. And, just enjoying them, watching them grow up, and, maybe a little bit of distribution for pretzels and, dare I say it, donuts too. We'll see. We'll see. Uh, I'm open. I'm flexible to what people say they want, um, as long as they don't tell me that they want barley in their beer, because that I will not do.
Exactly, right. And if you give it a little bit more time, you can put them to work in the brewery too, right? So you need a
That's
couple
right.
extra hands, keep it in the family, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, hey, JP, I want to thank you for joining us today, and I really appreciate you coming on and spending some time with us talking about your brewery, talking about your future plans. Man, I need to get one of those donuts quickly.
I
Um,
just remember, if you're going to come down and you want a maple bar, first full weekend of the month, whenever Saturday of the beginning of the month is, that's maple bar weekend.
Nice. And JP is a frequent contributor to our Zero Tolerance Gluten-Free Homebrewing Facebook page. So if anyone out there has any subjects that they need feedback on, that's basically where most of the conversation happens. You can find Bierly Brewing in McMinnville, Oregon, soon to be moving to a much fancier, high-tech space here, hopefully soon. And I just want everyone to remember, right? No barley, no wheat, no rye, no problem. Thanks for
Exactly.
joining us.
Yeah. Thank you.